Meredith. John, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Oh yeah,
sure. Hi everyone, I'm John Pierce. I'm with US Geological Survey in Anchorage, Alaska. I'm a program manager for our ecosystems research and involved in our Changing Arctic Ecosystems initiative, and very much interested in how the federal agencies can do a better job communicating with communities throughout the Arctic, and work with Colleen on this collaboration team. So thanks, Colleen. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, John. Meredith, did you have something else to add?
Nope.
Okay. Well, so first of all, welcome everyone. It's really nice to see some familiar faces and new faces to the ARPIC team. As my colleagues at NSF already mentioned, I'm Colleen Strawhacker. I'm a program officer on the Office of Polar Programs and one of the program officers on Navigating the New Arctic. And you're calling into the Coastal Resilience IARPIC team. And one of the interesting things about the Coastal Resilience team is that, as you can imagine, it takes a lot of interdisciplinary convergence, co-produced work to understand coastal resilience, kind of thinking about Indigenous knowledge, the social sciences, physical sciences, natural sciences, et cetera, to kind of really get a good understanding of coastal resilience. And I think one of the things that I've been realizing in both my role at NSF and as a researcher and working on IARPIC is that a lot of questions I get are, how do I make friends with somebody in this other discipline? Or how can I create relationships with somebody who has this expertise that I really want to tap into? Or how do I do this interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary convergence research better? And so I thought with, one of the things we focused on at NSF was creating this community office to really think about how we can better support the Arctic research community to do that better, and how do we kind of support both our Navigating the New Arctic PIs and scientists and people living in the Arctic to work better. And I think a lot of other themes that have come up in the introductions about kind of how do we improve communication among the various different entities working in the Arctic, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a very big topic that I know I have been trying to wrap my head around. I know a lot of you have been trying to wrap your heads around. So I thought having an introduction from the Navigating the New Arctic Community Office would be a really nice example of how, we are trying to address that in this space, and then have a wider conversation on that. So with that, I think I'll hand it over to Matt and the NNA-CO team to hear more about what they're doing, and then we can have a discussion.
Thank you, Colleen. And thanks also to John and Meredith for inviting this presentation to contribute to this discussion. This is a really impressive collection of people on this call, many of which have in the past and continue to shape my thinking on a lot of these things. And so thanks to everyone for joining today. I will share my screen if that's okay. I also posted the slides onto the IARPIC page for this event. So if you're on the phone, you can download those slides now or later. Let's see here. Can you confirm that you see my slides?
We see notes.
See your notes, Matt.
See my notes. That doesn't work. I'll go without my notes. I should have.
Would it be easier? Do you want me to share the screen and move the slides for you, Matt? Now
how's that?
That looks great.
Okay, I apologize for that. Yeah, so this presentation is a very general overview of what we have planned for the community office. You see my notes again, huh?
Nope. No, we see the
So we
slide.
see your slides, yeah.
I'm sorry, my screens are getting mixed up here. Now I don't even see my slides. Colleen, I'm sorry, would you be able to advance my slides for me?
Yeah, let me go ahead and I'll download them through this link.
No. Maybe I'll. My apologies. happened? There we go.
Okay, yeah, we see them now.
Okay. Yeah, there's something wrong with using a PDF version of my slides. It was screwing it up on my end. So without without any further delay, I wanted to note that a couple of members of our leadership team from the community office are also on the call. Nora Johnson, Twyla Moon, and James Temte. I myself am Matthew Druckenmiller. I am the PI for the NNA community office, and also a research scientist at NSIDC, the National Snow and Ice Data Center. And I'm calling in and presenting today from the traditional territories of the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho nations. So again, this will be a fairly general overview about the NNA community office. As you may know, NNA is one of the 10 strategic big ideas of the National Science Foundation, focused on addressing challenges in the changing Arctic using a convergence research approach. NNA encompasses over 140 individual awards. Convergence research it can be thought of as highly interdisciplinary research that draws on a diversity of expertise. And so hopefully this presentation will set the stage for some discussion today about how to advance interdisciplinary collaborations within Arctic research. The goal of NNA is to build new research partnerships, to diversify the next generation of Arctic researchers, and to enhance formal and informal education, and to use co-production of knowledge approaches when and where appropriate. And so this community office is contributing to this mission of NSF. We are a 5-year cooperative agreement. So we are working very closely with the NSF NNA working group. And as was noted earlier, there are many members of this NSF working group here in the call. So hope to have your input in this discussion as well. So I wanted to start with just a vision for what we have planned for the community office. So this is meant to emphasize some of our key priorities, one of which is making—
Matt, sorry to interrupt. We still see the title slide.
Huh.
Matt, I have your PDF downloaded if you want me to try to go ahead and share it.
Yeah, I don't think I can screw this up anymore. So it might be better if you
here, let's try this. All right, does that work?
It does. I can see the slides that you're sharing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you might try decreasing the column on the right-hand side, but other
Oh,
than-
this guy.
So
it's good enough, I think. Thanks.
okay. So you can advance to the third slide, please. Are you advancing? I don't.
I did. Can I?
Okay. Well, maybe I don't see them advancing on my screen. Maybe others don't as well, but
we don't see it advancing either. Thank you. This is Gay.
Thanks, Kay. Well, maybe we can move forward without slides if that would be the preferred way of doing this.
That works.
Okay. There we go.
Okay. A bit fuzzy, but I guess we'll work with it. So, again, apologies for the problem here. So, our vision for the community office first is the need to make new connections from across and beyond the funded NNA community. So that includes connections between researchers, educators, Arctic communities, decision makers, and international partners. You know, connections that will help us ask the right questions to guide future research. Secondly, we're hoping to contribute towards strengthening capacity for collaborative research partnerships, capacity that extends from one end of the spectrum of navigating cultures and institutions while co-developing projects at their inception, to at the other end of the spectrum, being able to practice the principles of open science, for example, so that our hard-earned data sets are used and reused by those that need them. Also, we recognize that action-oriented research is difficult. It's hard to design. It's hard to get it into the hands of those that need it. It's hard to document how it's actually being used. And so we see this as really a challenge for our community so that we can learn from each other to define what success looks like in interdisciplinary convergence research in practice from beginning to end. And lastly, our vision certainly rests on the goal of building and sustaining lasting and trusted relationships, those that endure through projects and into the Arctic's coming years and decades. Next slide, please. So this year is meant to present the design of our community office, which was intentionally structured to maximize our ability to effectively partner. So the community office is a distributed office across 3 universities. The first being the University of Colorado Boulder, where I sit. University of Colorado Boulder is hosting the central office, which is leading the primary engagement and coordination of the NNA research community. Alaska Pacific University in Anchorage is hosting our community extension office, from which we will lead a program of engagement, capacity building, and collaborative communication activities, focusing heavily on Arctic community partners. And the University of Alaska is hosting our education outreach field office, focusing on the coordination of culturally appropriate approaches for connecting with Arctic classrooms. In this diagram in the middle layer there, the light blue is meant to emphasize some of the key partners that we'll be working with in the coming years. As we do that, we're hoping to really support ongoing efforts and not duplicate or overshadow existing efforts. We also are working with 2 advisory boards, a research advisory board and an Indigenous advisory board. And I note that Melinda Chase from our Indigenous advisory board is here on the call. These boards are meant to ensure that the office is responsive to and supporting the NNA community, and again, making sure that we're supporting and uplifting existing efforts. Next slide, please. This here is providing a snapshot of our office's objectives. We have a core central objective focused on communication, coordination, and learning. So hearing Gay's view on the type of communication that's needed right now as researchers begin to travel much more to the rural parts of the Arctic is really a priority that we share. And so I hope to hear Gay's thoughts on that topic during our time for discussion. Around this central objective, we also have 4 strategic objectives. The first is on co-production of knowledge. So in an Arctic context, co-production of knowledge often refers to processes that support equal and synergistic roles for Indigenous knowledge holders and conventional scientists based on principles of reciprocity and commitment to relationship building. So accordingly, our community office is looking to support the NNA research community in recognizing and practicing meaningful engagement and partnership. And James will speak a little bit about APU's role in doing that. Our other strategic objectives are again, supporting research convergence, where we will be leading a number of opportunities for researchers to collaborate across their individual projects, especially in terms of how their work may be applied and disseminated. We have an objective focused on education outreach, focusing on coordinating impactful and culturally appropriate activities with educators and Arctic classrooms. And lastly, we have an objective focused on open science, where we'll be promoting and sharing resources for the openness, integrity, and reproducibility of NNA-funded science, while also building awareness on key topics, including working with social science data and upholding Indigenous knowledge and data sovereignty. Next slide, please. I'll try to go a little quicker so we have room for discussion. The community office is prioritizing developing collaborations within and beyond the NNA community. And so we are looking to build off of the great work that ARCIS has done as the interim community office. So we'll be soon hosting a lot of information about what's currently funded at the project level, but also trying to convey how the NNA research is connected across geographies. We will be creating in the coming years convergence working groups, which we will be supporting with funded early career fellows. These will be working groups that will regularly convene to focus on collaborating to support action-oriented research synthesis. We will be working with the Arctic Data Center to develop custom data portals across these different convergence working group topics. And so we haven't identified the topics of these working groups yet, but as an example, you could imagine that one topic could be focused on coastal systems, for example. And then also these working groups will have a priority to document and share best practices in doing this type of collaboration. And again, looking to build capacity and resources to support open science, which will be done in the context of the working groups by demonstrating best practices in open science, but also through developing targeted trainings for the NNA community. Next slide. Again, we'll be working to support engagement between researchers and Arctic communities. We see that the Indigenous Advisory Board will be critical and helping us to understand where there are opportunities and how to address some of the prevalent concerns and challenges that have been raised by the community in recent years. And so again, many of the people on this call today have been in discussions with myself and others from our community office team as to how to begin to be part of the solution. So we'll be, through the community office, having community visits, developing a monthly podcast to talk about the challenges and collaborative Arctic research, and also planning regular tribal engagement sessions. We'll be developing some training. Some of that will be focusing on developing culturally appropriate curriculum to advance collaborative and community-based Arctic research. Next slide. I won't have time to get into the details, but there is a lot of work being done to broaden participation through education outreach activities. So Anna Gould here at the University of Colorado is working closely with Elena Sparrow and Katie Spellman at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And one of the things that they'll be hosting very soon is the second meeting of the Broader Impact Network, which will be on July 22nd. So if you're interested in hearing more about the education outreach team and what they have planned ahead, actually joining that Broader Impacts Network in their upcoming meetings will be a really efficient way to do that. And you can find information about that upcoming meeting on our website. Next slide. I encourage you, if you're interested, to look at the guiding principles that we thought very carefully about as we plan for this community office, and that we will continue to revisit as we develop opportunities and programming for the NNA community. And with that, I'll pass it over to James to talk a little bit about Alaska Pacific University's role within the community office.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. So I think a lot of people are interested and curious about, Alaska Pacific University recently. In the past 3 years, we've kind of been going through a transition from a private university to a tribal university. And so we've partnered with the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium to really look at meaningful ways to engage not only in research, but also education of our state's future leaders, and also in the circumpolar north. And so with that, I guess we currently have a student population base, 25% Alaska Native or American Indian. And so that bumps us up into the Alaska Native American Indian Tribal Serving Institution. About 13% of our faculty are Indigenous and 84% of our board of trustees. And so we're looking to grow in this area of co-production of knowledge, specifically when it's applied action-oriented research. And so if you go to the next slide, we've recently established the Office of Research and Community Engagement here. And that's to really foster relationships with the rural communities in the Arctic, as well as build relationships with researchers. And so we see part of the reason for this to really include communities in the conversation is to listen to their interests and their priorities, and then really be able to match those interests and priorities with researchers. And so we were really honored to be a part of the Navigating the New Arctic Community Office proposal. And we see it's just a way for us to continue to grow in this area of co-production of knowledge. A piece of APU's, I guess, role is to develop curriculums and trainings for and specific to community engagement. And so that would be, targeted towards people that really are interested in doing research in the Arctic, but maybe don't have an experience or they don't know too much about the Indigenous populations that live up here. So to really just support them in, helping them approach it in a really culturally aware way. So yeah, if any of you here have questions about APU, feel free to contact me. Happy to answer questions. One other note, we recently hired our community engagement coordinator, our Indigenous engagement coordinator. And so she'll be starting here this month. And so we'll have a full-time person on board working specifically to make these connections and collaborations. And she has a background in fishery aquatics, but also two-eyed seeing. And so that's where you're taking Indigenous knowledge and you're pairing it with Western science and really coming up with a holistic view. And so we're really excited to have Carly start. And I think the next slide is kind of an overview of our team. And so, we're pretty strong, and we're really excited to support the National Science Foundation and be a resource for the broader community.
Thanks, James. So with that, I think you can go to the last slide, which again, I'll just acknowledge our support from NSF and again mention that we are working closely with the NSF NNA working group and look forward to that collaboration in the years ahead. Also, I'll just end by again apologizing for the technical delays there at the beginning. So sorry to take time away from the great discussion I hope we have.
Thank you, Matt and the NNA-CO team, and great job recovering from technical difficulties that we were both having. And thanks to Meredith for stepping in and solving all of our problems as usual. So with that, I'll just open it up for any questions on the NNA for the NNA-CO, or if there are any large kind of bigger comments about interdisciplinary collaboration. Does anybody want to kick us off?
Well, this is Natasha, and I just wanted to say, was the presenter's name Matt?
Yes, Matt.
Matt, don't be so hard on yourself. These things happen to the best of us and the worst of us, and so, you know, beating yourself up is not going to help. You did your best, and you did a very good job. So just roll with the punches. It's okay.
Well, thank you, Natasha. That actually helps a lot to hear that, because man, it's frustrating when you think you've mastered the Zoom world and then you realize there are curveballs in that world as well. But you're right. Roll with it. I think that's something that we all are learning more and more, especially after this last year that we all shared together.
Yeah, really wonderful comments. Thank you, Natasha. And I see Britt has a question in the chat for James. And Britt, I know Arcus has some experience working in this space too. I don't know if you have any other comments to kind of chime in on you know, how Arcus is operating this space, or, you know, anything else you want to add.
Yeah, I think that we share a lot of the same interests as everyone else on the call, and I'll just put in the chat kind of some of the things we're thinking about as, you know, a consortium of individuals and institutions that really care about collaboration. And Arcus does this in many of the same ways that everybody else here does. You know, we're convening people, we're talking to our community about what their needs are, we're asking about collaboration opportunities. We've been thinking about interdisciplinary research coordination needs for quite a while now. So we've done a few community surveys. So I have a little bit of information about, you know, priorities for the type of connections people are trying to make, you know, information about some of the barriers that are standing in the way of those kind of connections. And, you know, we're also thinking about how to build networking activities that actually lead to long-term activities. So, you know, we've been working with IARPIC on things like speed networking events. We've been working with UC Irvine, Holly Hapke, on workshops to bring people together and really, you know, investigate possible collaborations in more depth, you know, and then bringing them back to funders after people have had a chance to talk to one another about potential collaboration ideas to see what kind of funding opportunities exist. That was a series of 3 activities that we did this year. And then looking ahead, we have an interdisciplinary advisory committee that we're working with, and Pips Veazey here on the call is a co-chair of that committee. That is currently helping us think about this space more broadly and trying to help us understand, with all the good work that's going on, where would additional focus actually be really beneficial. And so I'm looking forward to hearing more about it, you know, other activities, learning more about what the NNA community office is going to be doing. And I think I see Arcus's role is really in trying to do more broad outreach to some of the community members that maybe are not quite as engaged in IARPIC, not quite as engaged yet with NNA, and trying to be a very welcoming you know, place for them to start their journey into a more closely aligned and collaborative community of Arctic research. And Pips, I don't know if you have anything that you'd want to add about what we're doing with our advisory committee.
Thanks, Britt. I'll just say something very briefly, and this is based on some work that I've been doing with a convergence group at the National Science Foundation, and that's that this idea of friction, I kind of bristled at the word friction because I think it has a negative connotation. But it's been a very interesting conversation to be part of in a kind of a broader context beyond the Arctic as well. and just thinking about what friction is in terms of a team. My expertise is team science leadership, and we try not to have interpersonal friction because that takes away from the science that we're doing. But intellectual friction and being able to challenge each other with ideas and advance scientific ideas is something that a lot of us thinking deeply about convergence right now are very interested in. And I think there's a balancing act there, creating a space that is welcoming and safe and flexible and intellectually stimulating is challenging. And I found myself challenged in some of these things. So I'm going to stop there. I'm not sure this is the direction that you wanted to go, Britt, but it's something that I've been thinking a lot about lately, and it's really nice to see all these smart people on this call.
So Pips, there's a question from Nora about what context you're exploring the concept of friction in.
Yeah, thanks. The idea of friction came up in advancing scientific ideas that that you may, as a team, you may not always be advancing kind of in a linear, smooth process. And there may be moments where people are challenging ideas and saying, hey, I hear what you're saying and I appreciate that. And I think something slightly different. And I'm going to talk about what I also think I'm seeing. And finding a way to do that gracefully is challenging. And sometimes it works very well, and sometimes it's harder. But what we've seen with some of the teams who have been successful in addressing convergent topics is that they do have this friction, that they're able to address really hard topics as a team to advance the things that they're doing. So creating a space to do that is, I think, important and related to what we're talking about today.
Yeah, I think these are great points. And I see that Nora just popped in a book recommendation on this topic too, because I'm seeing too, I think we get similar kind of, ideas about conflict and whether conflict is really a bad word or a good word. I think in the past, but conflict is necessary when you're, or sometimes friction is necessary when you're trying to advance different ideas forward. And Nora, I don't know if you want to add any more to your comments in the chat at all.
Well, I just really appreciated hearing Pips raise that point that it had come up in, sort of in this group effort and conversation that you're exploring this concept. This is like me pulling out my graduate school nerdy knowledge. This is an ethnography that probably mostly anthropologists read, but I think it's really interesting and actually really relevant. And so maybe others would get something from it, but it does, this idea of friction as a space of resistance. It can create resistance, but it can also be a place where you sort of stop and re-examine and rethink things. And so it can also be a productive kind of way of looking at how we relate to one another when people are coming from a place of difference, whether that's disciplinary difference or cultural difference.
Yeah, there's really good, I'll return to the really good conversation in the chat too, but I see that Adelheid has their hand up if you want to chime in.
Yeah, thanks, Colleen. Yeah, a couple questions. There was mention, I think it was Matt that had a slide that talked about building capacity and resources to support open science. And I'd like to know a little bit more about what exactly that means, open science, and the building capacity. And James Tempte, talked about the APU office. And I sit on the Alaska Pacific University's Elders Council, and I'm just wondering, James, if there's going to be, starting conversations with the elders, and maybe there's already conversations with the trustees.
Yeah, Adelaide, thank you for those questions. And yes, we definitely plan to engage with the elders. Lately, it's mainly been Wilson Justin who's been participating and kind of advising as his plan for the Office of Research and Community Engagement was, or his idea really started the planning phase. And so we've been working with him, and the Board of Trustees, they're also aware of the office. I think at this point, our president, current president, Hilton Hollick, meets with them regularly. So, but if you have any other questions or want to know more, please send me an email. And Britt, I dropped my email in the chat. It's jtempty@alaskapacific.edu. And so if anybody has questions or wants to learn more about this project and the other projects that we're working on, and some of the courses that we're developing, just please let me know. Yeah, we have a lot going on, but it's all very exciting and kind of moving in this general direction. And so, yeah, happy to talk.
Yeah, and I can try to answer Adelaide's question about open science, just to clarify what's meant by that. I think one way of thinking about open science is a way to kind of demystify the scientific process and to ensure equitable access to the outcomes of the scientific process and of the research process. And so a big part of open science is working to make sure the data, the knowledge that results from research is really clear as to how that was gathered, to ensure that any issues about the integrity of that information is addressed, to ensure that there is equal and fair access to that data. And so open science is within the community office is going to be led pretty heavily by our colleague here, Andy Barrett, who has a lot of experience in working with data. But again, it's really focused on ensuring that the scientific process is open and understandable by all those that are participating and in a position to benefit from that scientific research.
I would just add, Matt, that we also have an emphasis on ethically open data. So not just making data freely available, in any context, but really also trying to help support the NNA community and the Arctic research community in efforts to really understand, what are sensitivities around data, to recognize and uphold Indigenous data sovereignty. So that's a component of the community office's work, is to help support those efforts. And there are I think there's a lot of really good resources that are being developed. I know, for example, Queric has a training that they are developing. I don't know, Julie, if you want to talk more about that training. But I think our role within the community office is to help, make connections to some of those resources and efforts, as well as to supplement them if there are gaps.
Thank you. And I'll just also highlight some really good conversation that builds off of Natasha's comment. Corey was saying, it's important to be vulnerable and be honest and to don't beat yourself off. When you fail, it's not an if, for sure. We all have failed and will fail in the future, and learning from that. And Margaret has added that I like the saying that being uncomfortable means that you are learning, and that co-production of knowledge and interdisciplinary work is co-learning. And I think Corey and Margaret and Natasha highlighted something that I think scientists who are kind of trained in the kind of conventional academic world struggle with, because we're told we need to be right about everything sometimes, and we can bristle at some of that feedback. But I think that's a really important skill for people to have in this space, to just kind of be open to learning new perspectives too. So I thank you for sharing those perspectives. I don't know if Corey or Margaret or Natasha want to add anything to those thoughts. Awesome. Okay, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. Go ahead.
I don't necessarily like the word failure. I mean, that's a word that you could use, but when we think of failure, again, it's a negative connotation. But what do scientists do but try things? And if it doesn't work, they try it again, which is the exact same way that Native people have done for thousands of years. We try things, and if it didn't work, we tried it a different way. So that's not failure. That's learning. That is how we learn. And I think it's very important that, you know, we do be gentle with ourselves, because that gives us the grace and the space to be gentle with other people and let people be gentle with us. Because it's great that we're doing all of these things to collaborate, and we're, you know, building relationships, but what is the spirit that we're doing it with? How are we approaching it? Are we approaching it in a way where thou shalt not fail? That's not realistic. And so it's very important that as we're building relationships, you know, in all of this, that we build it in a good way. And so when we giving him grace, he's going to pass that forward, and those people will pass it forward. That's what it means to be doing this in an Indigenous way, is we be good to each other. That's indigenizing this space. That's why I did that.
That's a really lovely perspective, Natasha, and I really appreciate you sharing that. I think we could all learn from some of those thoughts in our work. So I know that we're coming up on time, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time and being zoomed out. Are there any? I see Gay, you just came off on mute. Did you want to add something?
Well, yeah, thanks. I was looking at the agenda for this meeting, and there were 3 questions. Is that correct? Am I on the right? Did I have the right webpage? I don't know. What are the challenges to building interdisciplinary convergence projects? How are researchers connecting with the right people to build interdisciplinary projects? And how are researchers successfully developing research questions in this space? Are we going to hit any of those, or are we closing out?
Yeah, it looks like we're out of time to address them. Those were kind of for initial brainstorming, just to see where the discussion went. But we can certainly find a space. Maybe we can continue this conversation on the IARPC Collaborations website. Meredith, Liz, I think it might be a good idea maybe to create a post, and we can tag everyone who attended the meeting to see if we'd like to address those questions.
My only question, I guess thank you. My only question would be, at this point, since we're out of time, is what do you mean by the right people?
Yeah, great question.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Well, so I want to, I think scheduling maybe a part 2 to continue the dialogue would be a great idea, Melinda. Thank you. I know people have vacations and subsistence activities to do and things like that. So maybe we can plan for something in early fall to continue this conversation. I think it was really fruitful, and we only have an hour to kind of talk about a very complex topic. So I think following up on this in the coming months would be a great idea. So with that, I just want to thank the NNA Community Office team for coming to present to us and kicking off our discussion. And thanks to everyone for kind of contributing your thoughts. Gay, I'm sorry we didn't get to the questions, but I think the discussion went in very fruitful directions otherwise. And I'll go ahead and start a post so we can kind of continue the conversation online if we want to.
Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.